what is it we actually control as hedge fund managers? What are the variables under our control? What are the degrees of freedom of a hedge fund? That's an interesting question, and I want to talk about this today. But first, let me give you an update. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast, June 12, 2020. My name is Krim, and here's the update. For today, the fund is down 3.5%. The S&P is up 1%. For the week, we are up 3.5%, and the S&P is down 4.5%. And for the year, the fund is up 57.5%, and the S&P is down 5.5%. So we're outperforming by 63% for the year. The news flow today, we had 2 downgrades on Tesla, which has driven down Tesla. That's why the stock was down about 3%. The analysts, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, both are not very important for Tesla because their contribution has been pretty limited. But nevertheless, I think they have some weight. For us, this is not very relevant. There has been some good news on the CRISPR front, however. Our CRISPR index has contributed about 0.5% today plus. The gene editing platform CRISPR is being used, amongst other things, to solve blood disease issues, such as if your blood doesn't have enough hemoglobin, and this is believed can be fixed with a gene editing technology, and CRISPR is the main platform which is being used for that. And we don't have clear signs yet, but we have some positive data that is showing a lot of promise. Finally, there's some news on Intel. Jim Keller, a very big name in the semiconductor industry, resigned from Intel. And while I would say that's generally bad news when big names resign from your companies, I think in this case, it's about time for Jim Keller to walk into his sunset. He's been a big contributor for the semiconductor industry. He's helped AMD, Tesla, and Intel do great things. But it's about time for him. I think new blood is necessary to continue on the path of AI and on data-driven and cloud-driven technologies, which are the main drivers for Intel. On that front, I must say that Intel is our weakest contributor, or has been our weakest contributor over the last couple of weeks. And while we're still patient with Intel, we are getting to the point where we have to stress test our thesis here. Our thesis on Intel is that they will participate on the AI front and generate excess growth because of the applications of AI across the computing world, and that they will also take advantage of their own manufacturing technology, which has been delayed for a while, and that they will get back to leadership in manufacturing on the 10 and 7 nanometer, and also go to the 5 nanometer front a little bit faster than the market expects. So we expect some change in the manufacturing leadership of Intel, which has been suffering over the last couple of years. And we're not seeing any signs right now, but we're still hopeful that that can happen in the next couple of months if we get some positive news and a re-rating of the stock. Now let's get to the question of what are the degrees of freedom of a hedge fund. And let me tell you something. You might think that a hedge fund manager sits in his office and pushes buttons and calls and gets calls and does all these things all the time. In fact, if you really think about it, what is it you control as a hedge fund manager? There aren't that many things. Let me start with the list. One thing you control is you can raise capital. The other thing you control is you can decide what to invest in and when to invest. And then you have the control over the sizing of your portfolio. And I would say that's about it. And as far as raising capital is concerned, we at Orange Capital have been of the opinion since our founding in 2008 that in fact raising money is not even part of your degree of freedom, because it's a result of your returns. So higher returns attract money, lower returns push money away. So it's not even part of your degree of freedom. Now, you can be very good at raising money. Let me get this right, there are fund managers that are very good at raising money, but those people typically are not risk takers. They are asset gatherers. That's a different business. That's a marketing business. I would say even almost an entertainment business. You spend time on CNBC, on Bloomberg, you talk about stocks, but what you're really good at is raising money. You're not necessarily a good risk taker. When it comes to risk taking, it's about what you invest in and when do you invest in. So those are the degrees of freedom. And now let me give you a little bit more clarity on what we believe at Orange Capital Partners, what our degrees of freedom are, or in other words, what is it we're spending our day with in terms of making decisions, because those are the things we can control. What is that? And in order to do that, let me give you some history. We started in 2008. We came from the risk arb world, or more generally from the special situations world. So that was the world that me and Zovinar came from when we started Orange Capital Partners. And that world has a very specific character to it, which is it does not allow for the degree of freedom of timing. The timing is given by the situation. When you play a risk arb situation, you are given a merger announcement, so you don't control the timing, it's announced by the companies. You then set up the risk arb spread and you get out when the merger closes. So both the in and the out are given by the situation. So we considered timing not part of our degree of freedom. We didn't want that because we didn't want to spend time thinking about when to get in and when to get out. All we wanted to care about is choosing what situations to be exposed to. Over time, risk arb became less competitive, so we had to move into other sectors. That's a typical thing that happens on Wall Street. So we had to start changing our strategy away from risk arb and special situations, and we did that. However, we still were uncomfortable with having the when as a degree of freedom. We were always comfortable with the what. So what do we actually choose to invest in? But the when, we were a bit less comfortable. But over time, we were almost forced to do that. We had to do more things where the when became a degree of freedom. And we noticed over time that we were not very good at that. For example, we bought Whole Foods back in 2008, 2009. It was 2009, more 2009, 10 maybe even. And we bought it because we thought it's a special situation because they were expanding in new markets. But then we realized that the reason we made money, we made a lot of money with that stock, was because of the fundamental changes in their business. Whole Foods was a disruptor in the retail food industry. That's why we made money. And gradually we started shifting towards situations where the underlying fundamentals had a step change or something changed dramatically. And over time, we realized that the place to be in the world that we're living today and in the last couple of years have been living in was the place where technologically driven disruption changes the fundamentals of a business. In fact, the best thing you can do is invest in a company which is a disruptor themselves. And that was our premise. And we started investing more and more in those types of companies. And that's also why we chose to move from New York City to San Francisco, because the disruption, a lot of disruptive companies are coming from San Francisco. But the key about this is that in this type of situation, you actually, again, don't have to think about the timing.